Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you today about tenants. It seems that more and more real estate agents are involved in tenancies. In fact, I've seen articles where they're talking about real estate agents not only involved more and more in finding rentals for tenants, but some of them have shifted their whole practice almost entirely to that. That's no doubt in response to the slower market and increased opportunity, but also to the fact that rents are going up and it becomes a little more profitable. But I want to talk about some of the processes that we go through in renting out an apartment. When it comes to an application the tenant fills out once they've found the apartment they're interested in, for years now I've used what I call a rental application. This is the form that I use, two-sided form, and I've used it for years. It's got advantages and disadvantages. The second thing is the Ontario Residential Tenancies Agreement. And this is a 14-page document, 7 pages, tells them all the reasons they can get out of all the provisions of the Residential Tenancies Act. And it's a mandatory thing, and you've got to have the tenant sign one of these within 14 days of the rental application and the tenancy. And then, of course, if you are listing and working through MLS, you've got the AREA Agreement to Lease, which is Form 400, and that's a form that you'll be quite familiar with. So those are 4 things, and I think 3 things, and I think that they've got corresponding advantages and disadvantages. One of the key reasons why I like this rental application that I've used for years is because it spells out a difference between who is a tenant and who is an occupant, and it lists both. It's important as landlords that we understand and we make that differentiation. You can't maybe stop somebody from bringing a girlfriend or a spouse into a unit. You maybe can't stop somebody from sharing an apartment later on, but it doesn't make them a tenant. And if the tenant that's under contract leaves, the other person doesn't automatically have a right to that unit. And the fact that you've differentiated and made it clear that they have no right to the unit makes it a lot easier in the eviction process if that becomes necessary. And so this rental application spells that out. Now, the government agreement makes no mention at all of occupants. It just says tenants. And I think that's a shortcoming. So I use both, of course. I take the rental application, and at the same time, I have the tenant fill out and complete the government form that's required. But then there's the agreement to lease that the Ontario Real Estate Association puts forward, and it spells out, again, something about occupants. And I think it's interesting what it says. Under Unit 5, or Number 5, use, it says, only the tenant named above and any person named in a rental application completed prior to this agreement will occupy the premises. I'm not sure why it has to be filled out prior to this agreement rather than after, but it's referencing. So the Ontario one is referencing the rental application and saying those are the only ones who are legally allowed to be occupants. But there's another issue that I really want to zero down on this morning, and that's the matter of tenant insurance. My rental application form that I use has no reference whatsoever to tenant insurance. And I think that's a shortcoming. If you take a look at the form that the government uses, one of the good things about that is it raises the issue of tenant insurance. Now, how it raises it is it says under the heading of tenant insurance, it says yes or no. Are you going to require tenant insurance or are you not? You tick off one or the other. When you get to the Ontario Real Estate Association one, it makes it mandatory. It raises the issue of tenant insurance, and it makes it mandatory that use it. This is what it says. The tenant agrees to obtain and keep in full force and effect during the entire period of the tenancy and any renewal thereof at the tenant's sole cost and expense, fire and property damage and public liability insurance in an amount equal to that which a reasonably prudent tenant would consider adequate. The tenant agrees to provide the landlord upon demand at any time proof that said insurance is in full force and effect, and to notify the landlord in writing in the event that such insurance is canceled or otherwise terminated. So they're saying on the AREA form, you have to have title insurance We agree to provide you proof if you request it, and we notify you if anything interrupts it or terminates it. So let me tell you a little bit about personal experience. I've been a landlord for many, many years. It goes all the way back to the time I was a student going to university. My first year, couldn't get adequate housing at all. The second year, with some help from my mom, I bought a house, rented it out to students, and I was one of the students and also the landlord. Upon graduation, I began a career as a professor at Lambton College in Sarnia, and the same day I bought 2 duplexes. When I began my real estate career in Hawkesbury, I bought a single-family rental and I bought a duplex. And when I moved to St. Catharines to open Remax Garden City back in '84, by '85 I had bought a triplex, and I'd continued that right on through to this day. It ties in with my money machine seminar and my firm belief in being a landlord. And of course, I don't sell them, and so I've maintained them over the years. So I've got a fair bit of experience when it comes to being a landlord. And I have to tell you that I have never, ever required tenant insurance. I've used the rental application form, doesn't mention it. I've used the government form, ticked off no, and on it goes. Now, there's been issues where it would have been handy. A lot of times I don't go through insurance. The insurance is there in case the property burns to the ground, some catastrophe happens. But if a tenant backs through a garage door or moves a barbecue up to siding and melts the siding, I don't go through insurance. I just tend not to. But there's been some issues. I have a property on Linwell Road, a duplex, lovely duplex. And years ago, we had a tremendous storm, a gully washer, they call it. And as a result, I ended up with 6 feet of sewage in the basement of this duplex. Now, there was a second floor apartment and a main floor apartment, and the main floor apartment had a finished basement, which had them a 4th bedroom, a recreation room, and a laundry room. Just got covered with sewage. They didn't have tenant insurance. Everything they had down there, and it was fully furnished, they had to throw out. Now, it turned out I didn't have insurance either. I had adequate insurance, but the insurance agent never told me that in the fine print, it didn't cover sewer backup, even though I was paying a premium for a rented property, because they said there's a higher liability of tenants throwing a diaper in the toilet or something and causing a problem. And the city said this was an act of God. We couldn't possibly have adequate storm sewers to handle this, so you're on your own, which I was. And then not that long ago, some time ago, just during COVID, I bought a triplex, spent a ton of money. I spent $600,000 renovating that property, needed an extensive amount of rebuild and rework. One of the problems I've found with contractors is sometimes they leave different things, a pipe where there goes through a wall, they leave it open for a period of time. I've had birds nest in attics, I've had squirrels nest in attics, all kinds of things. In this particular one, a couple of rats got into the property, into the inner workings of the building, and over a period of time, gnawed through a water pipe that serviced the kitchen of the main floor unit and flooded out the basement apartment. A lovely basement apartment, fully renovated. The tenant did not have tenant insurance, and everything that he had, or at least a good part of what he had, got thoroughly soaked. Most recently, a week or so ago, one of my tenants in a triplex was cooking something on the stove, put something in the pot, and then left. Well, the pot boiled dry, it overheated and filled the whole apartment with smoke, just caused all kinds of smoke damage. Fortunately, he did have insurance. I took it through insurance. I decided to take it through insurance because I really didn't know where to start with smoke damage all over the unit. And of course, it would have permeated his furniture, would have permeated his clothing and so on. Not only did he have a tenant insurance, but he had it through the same company that I have, and it was a real blessing. I didn't even go and attend. I got the adjuster call me, and she said, "Have you gone to have a look at it?" And I said, "Heck no, I don't want to depress myself." She laughed and said, "That's the best advice I've ever heard in my life." She said, "I had 2 or 3 rental units, and I got rid of them. I couldn't stand the constant grief that came. I wish I'd had that advice." But I didn't have to, because the insurance was looking after it in conjunction with the tenant's insurance, and just taking care of all these things that would otherwise have been a problem. You know, I think we as real estate agents tend to often, when we're renting out a property, whether we're representing the landlord or whether we're representing the tenant, we tend to skim through this business about tenant insurance. Sure, it's on the form, but it's just one of the items on the fine print. We don't even bring it to their attention. And I think it's very, very important that we do. I think when we're talking to a landlord, we should discuss the pros and cons about tenant insurance, and we're talking to a tenant, the same thing. You know, with the tenant, when there's some kind of damage, it's going to really impact them, and it may or may not be their fault, like the case of the flood I had on Linwell Road, and yet it's going to give them no protection at all from the landlord's insurance if they don't have insurance themselves. And then let's suppose liability. The tenant has a guest in the apartment, person slips and falls. Who are they going to sue? Well, they're going to sue the tenant, but the tenant doesn't have any insurance, so they're going to take the deep pocket approach and sue the landlord. And the landlord's insurance may or may not cover it. If the tenant has insurance, it goes subrogate to the tenant as well. This latest one, there's $2,500 deductible by insurance, and they said, you know what, though, we know it's not the landlord's fault, we know it's the tenant's fault, they have insurance, so we'll probably be able to work with the other insurance, and they said, and do away with the deductible. So it protects the tenant, protects the landlord, and I think it's something we need to take a real good, careful look at if we're going to be representing landlords and or tenants in the rental situation. Hope that makes sense. I want to thank you very much for taking your time to watch this video. I look forward to talking to you again next week.